Okay. So, good morning to you, dear Mr. Ken Wilber, in this 226th St. Valentine's Day, when we habitually meet to make our yearly interview filled with the questions of the integral community of my different social media platforms. It's a
Great.
great pleasure to be here with you, my friend, and
I'm
creator of
glad to be here.
You are the creator of the integral theory, named by many as the Einstein of consciousness, with more than 28 books published, cited as the most widely translated essays writing in America.
Right.
You've been translated to 30 languages. That's a lot.
That's right.
So, how are you today, Ken?
I'm just fine. Thank you.
So, off the record, because this is off the record, I want to introduce a question from your translator in Spanish, David Gonzalez Raga,
Okay.
that begged me to ask you about, and even though he was out of the time that I set to receive questions for you, I feel we may give him entry if you agree to do so.
Sure.
Okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So we will start with his question, and his
Okay.
question was, what's your take on the Palestine genocide? And also, which is the perception that you have about Trump and Trumpism?
Which is the perception that I have about Trump and Trump isn't? What does
Trumpism.
that mean? That,
You know, Trumpism is all the things that are surrounding Trump, all the things which, you know, the people that follow him, the people that has voted him, they are called Trumpist. And the Trumpism will be like the Sanchism in Spain, you know, that Sanchez, they call it Sanchism. So this is the same thing, Trumpism. Right? So what do you think about the Palestine genocide and Trump and the Trumpism mode
and
or
what
style?
part of the Palestine genocide do you want me specifically to comment on?
Yes. What do you
What
think
part?
about what has been happening in Palestine and with the genocide that you know, Netanyahu and the Israelites have been creating in Palestine? What is your take? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think the Palestinian question is a very difficult one. Um, I mean, the Palestinian people had a chance to vote in who they wanted to head them, and they voted in Hamas. And Hamas has been in charge of Palestine for something like 18 years. And they haven't done anything good for the country that I can tell. But Hamas still does insist on it's actually part of their governmental documents that they insist on genocide for Israel. So when we start talking about who's committing genocide, we have to be very careful. If Israel retaliated by taking genocidal actions against Palestine, it'd be hard to blame them since they're fighting a group that has already sworn and has written documents saying we want the genocide of Israel. That's what from the water to the sea means. Get rid of Israel. So I always, when we look at Palestine versus Israel type of situations, um, I always try to think of what it looks like from both sides. I mean, that's an integral approach in itself. But it's very difficult because most people in America tend to choose one side or the other. And so they are the ones that will call what Israel is doing to Palestine a Palestinian genocide. But they won't mention the fact that Palestine has already sworn to commit genocide on Israel. They just forget that. And I think that's not good. I'm not picking one side or the other. I'm not taking Israel's side when I point out that Israel's side is generally not being given its fair due in any conversation between the two sides. So, recent events in Palestine has just reconfirmed my feeling that there's a fundamental imbalance going on between how these two sides are discussed. And I think that's very unfortunate.
Very unfortunate, having in mind that even though it's true that Hamas has said that they wanted to get rid of Israelites or Israel, um, the imbalance of death and killings and humanitarian problems that they have created, really not letting like the wounded people or the sick people to receive help or give them food, or I mean, I don't see that as a very balanced situation, even though, because the civil um, um, population is not really like the guilty one, let's say, in order to receive all that horrible treatment. And even they have signed some kind of a peace. And even though they have signed some kind of a peace, Israel has kept on bombing.
Well, Israel has a standing order that when they're going to bomb an area that includes civilian people, they announce the times they're going to bomb so civilians can get out of the way. So that doesn't sound very much like a real genocide to me. Um, Maybe they've stopped doing that, and that would be unfortunate, but I know for a fact that they had that situation in place for many, many years. They would simply announce, we're going to bomb from 8 a.m. to noon and from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And the civilians could clear out if they wanted to. So that doesn't sound like a real genocide to me. What they're
It's
doing
very,
recently, I haven't followed that actually.
yeah, well, what they have been doing, it's very unfortunate because it really sounds as a genocide because of the imbalance of the number of victims that have appeared in Palestine side, which it's not even at all with the opposite. So even though you are right in the analysis of what Hamas has said at the beginning, and has been telling for 10 years, yeah,
Yeah.
it's not even at all. It's not balanced with the force and the strength and the meanness that they have put on the Palestine population. That's why it's the number of people dead, and the devastation of their stripe, which, because they are really living in a stripe of earth, it's been too much. That's why many people internationally is calling it a genocide. Dave?
Israel does not have very many friends internationally, so I would expect all of Israel's haters to call what they're doing a genocide, whether it is or isn't. But let me ask you this. If there were a group of people that swore that their sole aim is to commit total genocide on you, what would be the fair response to that? Shouldn't you, in fact, keep killing them until they're all dead? Since if any of them are alive, they're going to try to kill you. What's fair?
One thing is to talk, and another thing is to do. Don't you think? It's
Well,
different.
sure. But if you're the Palestinians, the Hamasian side, has already spoken. They want genocide for Israel, and they're not going to stop until they get it. So Israel, that has got a fairly intelligent mind in terms of how to fight, has decided that all we can do is wipe out that other side, since all they want to do is completely commit genocide on us. So we're going to go in with everything we have until we blast them off the face of the earth, if that's necessary. That's the only way to get them to stop talking about genocide, is to kill them. Well, who's to say what's fair?
Okay. What about Trump? How do you see Trump and people that follows and vote him and all these things? How do you see that?
Well, you can hate Trump, but you can't hate the 50% of the people in America that voted for him. So you can just get that out of your mind, unless you really do want to commit genocide on all Republican voters, in which case that puts you in league with Hamas and Hezbollah and other fun genocidal seeking people. I've always felt about Trump two very different ways, because he's really two very different people. On the one hand, he's first and foremost an anti-woke politician. He doesn't like wokeism, and nobody integral really likes wokeism. It's just a ridiculous form of exaggerated, one-sided attack thoughts. And I've always appreciated Trump's anti-wokeism. But then on the other hand, there's Trump, who has a very obvious, very deep, and very sincere malignant narcissism. And malignant narcissism was a term that was introduced by Erich Fromm, and it's considered the most serious mental disorder on the antisocial side of disorders. And Trump, unfortunately, has a horrible case of that. And virtually every psychiatrically oriented psychologist that I've heard talk about Trump has literally called him a malignant narcissist. And if you know anything about DSM-4 or 5 mental illness categorizations, you'll recognize malignant narcissism as the worst of the antisocial pathologies. And that's what Trump has. And so, on the one hand, he is very funny because he tells a lot of anti-woke jokes and stuff like that. But on the other hand, he'll slip in to this very narcissistic. I mean, I sat down one day with a pen and pad in hand to listen to him give a speech. And I wanted to just note how many sentences had a narcissistic slant to them. And I gave up about half of the way through because I couldn't keep track of them all, because almost everything he said was narcissistic. So he's always saying, well, we've got the best, this so-and-so. There's nothing like it in the history of America, and we're number one, and aren't I great? And I mean, he's just pathetic. And that's why he's a perfect projection magnet, because people see that malignant narcissism and it riles up any latent narcissism that they have in them. And then they project that onto him and end up hating him. And I don't think we've seen a president that had so many people going out of their way to criticize him or attack him. And I agree with all of those attacks. He's everything they say he is, which is horrible. And but he has gotten rid of a lot of this woke nonsense, and I really appreciate him for that. So I've always had this sort of split-minded feeling about Trump. I really appreciate his anti-wokeness, but I really dislike his malignant narcissism. It even gets me riled up. And I just don't have very much malignant narcissism, but he can draw it out of me just because I'm going to project whatever I do have onto him, because he's a magnet for those projections. And that's just always been a disaster with Trump. And
about
do you know?
the actions
Do
that
you
he
know?
takes internationally and the things that he says, and regarding, for example, the Mexicans and what is happening with the immigrants, and what happens with Norway and all these things. How do you see all those things?
Well, they're part of his malignant narcissism. I mean, no president that I can recall in my 70-plus year lifespan, I don't remember a president that would just verbally attack other politicians or other countries or the leaders of other countries and just say, they're a failed politician, they're rotten to the core, they're no good.
What he said about the French one. Yeah. Also.
Yeah, it's horrifying to me. I mean, where is diplomatic courtesy, if nothing else? I mean, we have general rules of discourse among world leaders. And the first rule is don't go bad mouthing them just because you're pissed.
That's right. That's right.
But that just doesn't register to a malignant narcissist like Trump. I'm not doing anything wrong. Oh,
Yeah.
please.
And regarding the situation, Ken, because of this Trumpism, all these people that follow him and that have their ideas, which, to my point of view, I don't know. What about your take about this? Because according to what I see, is the Trumpists, the ones that follow him, go beyond Republicans, in the sense of it's much more. We are not talking only about Republicans, which are very well, as good as the Democrats. They're very well. And yet Trumpism goes beyond all that.
Yeah.
So don't you think that Trumpism is making that the polarization of the American society is even more clear, and it's even harshest?
Yeah, I think so. And you're right that not all Republicans like Trump. I mean, I would say at least 30 to 40% of Republicans hate Trump just as much as anybody else in America hates him. You just can't get around it. And so the Democrats and Republicans are fairly united in their dislike of Donald Trump. Although in this last election, I think people, when you're faced with a malignant narcissist, you generally have one of two responses. You either just hate him totally, or you listen to it so often, you just get tired of it and you just sort of start sealing it out and you don't pay any attention to it. And that's
Every time,
generally what Trump has done.
you know, in many occasions, it happens to me the same as with Netanyahu and other people which are
Right.
doing things, and Putin, for example, also, when energetically, when I see them, instead of hating them or, you know, putting all my mirroring, giving them what I have
Right.
inside, no, what I do is send them love, send them positive energies, because I say everyone is sending them negative energies. So that if it ever has an effect, a wave effect that gets to them, it's more negativity on top of them, and they have already enough. So I'm going to do my little thing and I'm going to send them some positive to see if that brings some light. No?
Have you done that with Trump?
Yes, I sure
Oh,
have.
well, that's good. Then I believe that you're telling me the truth when you say that you send these nice things out, especially if you've managed to do that for Trump.
Not because I agree with him,
Sure, I
because
understand.
I do it just because, not adding more negativity into his
Right,
negativity, and to
right,
see if that energy, that positive energy that I send, that, let's call it light, that light that I'm sending may open a crack of light that may enter into his brain and heart.
right. And it'll also stop you from mirroring.
Yeah, sure. And
Okay,
see my own possible
right,
narcissism as well.
right.
Using for that as well. So
Yeah,
it's also very useful for that. Huh?
right,
So, okay, so let's see. The second question will be, or first, in reality, that was the
right.
zero, David. So the first question, how can we integrate all the developmental theories there are? Because even though they may not be integral theory, there are many other developmental theories. So how could we integrate them all?
Well, I, of course, am attempting to do that in insofar as I can. So if you look at the book Integral Psychology that I wrote, in the back I have charts of over 100 developmental models. And I list all of the stages that each of those 100 models present. And then in the book itself, I give a way to tie them all together. So
Mhm.
that's sort of what my main attempt has been to do, is to integrate all the various major models of development that we have. And I think I've done a fairly good job. Um, as I've divided those models into 5 major classes of wholeness that they seek: waking up, growing up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up. And each of those are very different types of wholeness. And so we have to recognize the differences, but also look for the commonalities that will allow us to bring them all together. And I found several. All of the models have 4 quadrants, for example. So I put that down as a major component of my integrator model. And I distinguish between states of consciousness and structures of consciousness, and that's a very important distinction.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
For example, waking up, it consists basically of states of consciousness, and growing up consists basically of structures of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And
so you see that the questions that we make you come from different people, and
right,
therefore every every person is in a different stage. So you will
sure,
have questions which of people which needs to know about this, and that maybe they have not even read integral psychology yet. So
right,
it's very good that you name the book where they can find that.
right.
It's very good.
And I would recommend, if they're going to read a book, to read my recent book, which is called Finding Radical Wholeness. And I think it's the best book I've done.
Yeah.
And since
To me,
I've done over 30 books, that's a fair amount of competition.
that's right.
But I really think it's a terrific book. And so I recommend people start with that book.
Sure. And remember that we made a wonderful 2 interviews about it.
That's right.
So yeah, I do highly recommend that book. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
So Ken, looking ahead, what inner quality or capacity do you believe human beings must most urgently cultivate in this accelerating complexity in order to participate consciously in the next phase of evolution?
Start thinking systemically or integrally. And if that means use my work, we'll use my work. If you have some way you want to pull everything together, then go right ahead. But what's very clear is that second tier, which is teal and turquoise for me, and their developmentalists themselves call them the paradigmatic and cross paradigmatic stages. Paradigmatic, which is teal and is the first of the major 2 integral stages of development, is called paradigmatic because it's unifying the multiculturalism that Green introduced. And green is coming right after orange, and orange is the rational, logical stage of development. And it always tends to produce universal similarities. So, and that's very much what Thomas Kuhn called a paradigm. And so many developmentalists call that stage the paradigmatic stage. And what it does is green, which is the stage right after orange, orange, like I say, produces universal singularities. So orange doesn't have Hindu chemistry and Buddhist chemistry and Christian chemistry. It just has chemistry, period. And there's one form of chemistry, and it's the same for everybody universally, uniformly.
Mm-hmm.
And what green does is it looks at those massive universal systems and it says, yeah, but Germany has some important truths and they don't fit into any of those systems. And France has some important truths and they don't fit in any of those systems. And Norway has some important truths, but they don't fit in any of those systems. And so green produces what's called a multicultural worldview because it looks at all the different cultures and finds important but different truths in all of them. And yet we should, if we're searching for truth ourselves, we should incorporate all of these different truths. But what green can't do is it can't unify all of those different truths. So it produces a pluralistic or postmodern or multicultural worldview. Teal comes along and
It can
teal is
integrate
now
all the
somewhere
others.
between 8 and 10% of the population, which is very good, particularly when the leading edge hits around 10%. It tends to cause a flip in the entire culture. And the entire culture doesn't come from that 10%. But when a culture reaches 10%, like in the United States in the 1960s, about 10% of the population reached green. And so we had a flip from modernism and rationality to postmodernism and multiculturalism. But what multiculturalism couldn't do is unify all of these different multicultural truths that Green spotted. And so it tended to produce polarization and division and separation and fragmentation and all of the bad things that started happening in the late 60s and early 70s. The good things that happened that came from Green was, of course, the civil rights movement, because Green reached out to all of these truths that were coming from all these minorities and all these separate cultures, and it tried to at least include their importance, even though it didn't know how to actually bind them all together. But today, about 23% of the population is at Green. So it's gone quite beyond that, and it's firmly the major leading edge of the Western world. And that's all of its problems come with it. It's fragmentation, it's polarization, it's wokeism. I mean, it's just everywhere. And so Teal came along, and when Teal first entered the picture, it was around 5 to 7% of the population. So it was just getting a foothold. And now it's around 8 to 10%. So it's getting close to that 10%. And when that happens, we're going to have a widespread understanding that you want to think systemically or integrally. And that's what Teal can do. Teal can take all of those multicultural truths and bring them together. So Teal, for example, looked at biology and looked at chemistry and said, well, wait a minute, those can be brought together. And they invented biochemistry. And that was really a profound discovery. And that's what Teal tended to do. Now, Teal would generally bring together 2 or 3 of these different multicultural truths that Green had discovered. But Green introduced so many different paradigms that it couldn't unite, that even Teal was sort of overwhelmed. And so it was up to Turquoise. And Turquoise came in and looked at all of the massive number of paradigms that Green had created, and it started drawing them all together. And if you want an example of that, well, my work is a perfect example of one that attempts to unify all of these different separations.
So that's why you say that the quality that we better develop is that systematic way of thinking.
That's right.
systemic way of thinking, which
That's
will
right.
be the integration of all this consciousness of the different
Right.
levels and
And
lines and states. So your
yeah.
integral theory.
And notice the difference where teal has 8 to 10% of the population, and green has about 25% of the population. The number at turquoise is 0.5% of the population. That's nothing. That's a very small amount. Although in a country of 300 million people, it does add up, but it's not huge. And so, but that is the direction that evolution is moving. And therefore, if people want to be part of that evolutionary movement, they'll start thinking systemically, they'll start thinking integrally. And if they want to use my work, they're more than welcome to use. I would be glad to let them use it. But
Would you
that's
say, Ken, would you say that this, that you say, 0.5, the turquoise way of thinking, would you like put it parallel to what Hansi Freinacht called metamodernism?
well, metamodernism. I have a little bit of trouble with metamodernism simply because they took the integral meta theory and simply renamed it and made some minor unnecessary changes in it. And I just find it, frankly, a ripoff of my work without hardly even acknowledging that they've done it.
Mm.
Although when they do talk about integral theory, they almost always screw it up. And it shows in metamodernism, because metamodernism is not a very profound integral theory. This is not. So, um,
So you wouldn't parallel metamodernism with turquoise level? No.
not really, no.
Okay.
I mean, it's attempting to come from turquoise, but it's bungling it up badly, mostly because it so desperately misunderstands and misinterprets the integral model.
Yeah.
Because the integral model has studied turquoise inside out, as it has every major level of development. And so we know what turquoise looks like, and we make sure our model looks exactly like turquoise, and it does.
Mhm.
So, but when metamodernism ripped off turquoise or ripped off the integral model and misunderstood it, then they butchered turquoise at the same time.
I think that they just call it differently. They copy it a lot. And he really talks about you in the book, in his two main known books. He talks about you, and yet he doesn't put you in a very nice place, even though he also reckons that he has taken a lot from you. He
Right,
does.
right.
Yes, it is true. So, anyway, let's go with a third question, which is today we observe a lack of openness, more and more ethnocentric and nationalistic attitudes, and lack of respect for one another, animals, and Mother Nature. So, what is your message of hope in this situation?
The message of hope is that turquoise is going to increase from 0.5% to 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6% within probably a decade or two. And as we move up in the turquoise scale, um, Claire Graves called the emergence of these second tier stages monumental leap in meaning. And they were absolutely monumental. All of the first tier stages, all of the stages up to and including green, each of them in spiral dynamics, there are 6 of them. In my model, there are 6 to 8. But each of those first tier stages all share one thing in common. They each think that they have the only correct worldview, and everybody else is either wrong or stupid or infantile or confused, but they have it right. And they don't. I mean, the whole thing, the reason Claire Graves said we find a monumental leap in meaning as we move from first tier to second tier is every second tier stage recognizes all of those previous stages are important, if for no other reason than they're actual steps to where we are now. And so, of course, you don't want to poo poo them or look down on them. That would just be suicidal, among other things. But the good news is, as more and more of the population moves to both teal and from teal to turquoise, and turquoise, by the way, said that teal is often called paradigmatic and turquoise is called cross paradigmatic, because what turquoise does is it takes all of the paradigms, not just two or three like biology and chemistry, but all of the paradigms that green sputtered out, and it draws all of them, it attempts to draw all of them together into a cross paradigmatic or including all known paradigms, and it ties them together. So that's one of the things that I do, for example. So if that means we look for ways to bring sociology, psychology, and history all together, because that's an important series of paradigms, and we're going to cross paradigmatic them.
Absolutely.
And not very many people think that way. They just don't. As a matter of fact, 0.5% of the population thinks that way, but that's not huge. So we're working on it, though.
Yeah. Okay, so integral theory has always framed reality as an evolutionary process of matter, life,
Right,
mind, and spirit,
right,
unfolding through increasing complexity and depth.
right.
Today, however, we seem to be living through a convergence of global crises, ecological collapse, political fragmentation, epistemic confusion, and rapid technological acceleration. From your current perspective, how do you understand the evolutionary moment humanity is in right now?
Um, well, we are starting to see a subtle increase in systematic courses given at colleges. Um, Almost every major college in this country has at least one teacher who literally teaches integral theory.
Yeah.
And that's a very encouraging situation, because for
It
every
is.
one teacher teaching 30 or 40 students, you're going to have those 30 or 40 students carrying it out there. And that's going to be very, very good news for the cross paradigmatic thinkers. Um, and we're not undergoing just ecological collapse, because we have made substantial advances in global warming, for example. And there's um, actually a couple books that I've seen out explaining how they are taking these measures that are helping curb global warming. And I know it's not a common knowledge, because when a lot of people get on the alarmist side of
Yeah.
ecological events, of course, and they've been doing that literally ever since I can remember. I remember being in fifth grade and seeing a big headline, although the fear then was a new ice age was coming, not global warming. A new ice age was headed this way, and we're all going to be dead by 1980. And Paul Ehrlich, in his population bomb, wrote that the country's not going to be around in 1980. We're all going to starve to death because the population bomb is just going to crush us. So there's that type of mentality in the background of most ecological statements. And you just have to make allowances for that and sort of brush it aside. And the books that do that have given very careful and very considerate explanations of what has actually been done to curb global warming, since we're apparently not going to face a new ice age.
So we have some hope.
Yeah.
Okay, so in relation to the above, has your view of how integral theory maps about real-world evolution changed over the years, given how unpredictable and non-linear and at times regressive global development has turned out to be? Where do you see integral theory still holding strong? And where has reality forced you to revise or refine it? Revise it or refine it? Because it's true that many things have happened. So in which way has your integral theory kind of evolved, you know?
Right. Well, since evolution is occurring, I mean, it's occurred in the past, and we see no reason that any of the forces driving evolution, none of those forces have stopped. And since in the past they produced evolution, there's every reason to believe that in the future they will continue to produce evolution. It might be slowed down. In some ways, it might be speeded up. But it's the forces are in existence and the forces are in play. And I have to say that ever since I came up with my first version, Wilber 1 of integral theory, I have seen these forces continue to act in the world. And again, there have been some regressions where nations have gotten mad at each other, or somebody like Trump badmouths some other foreign leaders. I mean, yeah, granted, that's all there, and that's something to keep an eye on. But the thing that we have working for us is these forces of evolution. And by the way, the neo-Darwinian synthesis of evolution, and that's the neo-Darwinian synthesis, is what most scientists today generally mean when they say evolution. But there's one way in which Darwinian evolution has failed, and it's failed miserably. And that is, it's very good at predicting sort of microevolution. So Darwin studied finches' beaks, for example, and showed how with different environmental forces, the beaks would change shape subtly or color subtly. And so Darwinian evolutionary theory covers those very minor changes. What it doesn't cover, and what virtually every evolutionary biologist will agree with, it doesn't cover large changes. It does not cover the emergence of entirely new species. Yeah. So to get, when birds have different sort of colored wings, and those colors can change because they're microevolution, but the actual growing of a wing in when it first occurred, first of all, this is the reason why Stephen Jay Gould, a brilliant evolutionary psychologist, he basically said, I don't buy the Darwinian because it can't explain these major changes, because these major changes occur in what he called punctuated equilibrium. And that's right. They just, they're huge leaps. And so you'd get the entire bone structure of a wing. And then when it first showed up as that entire bone structure. And there was no little minor Darwinian change. And as a matter of fact, the number of Darwin didn't even understand mutations in his time, but the way the neo-Darwinian synthesis attempted to explain it was that you get mutations in DNA or the genetic material, and those mutations drive evolution. But the problem with that theory is that the vast majority of mutations are lethal. And not only are they lethal, in order to produce a real large structure, you need, well, a horse takes, for example, at least 300 major mutations to produce all of its structural changes. And that's just not going to happen all at once, because if you get 300 mutations, at least 299 of them are going to be lethal.
Right.
So, and yet the horse won't work until all of them come into existence at the same time. And nobody's ever heard of 300 healthy mutations occurring at the same place in the same time. So it's gotten so bad that just 2 years ago, the British Royal Society, which is the oldest, largest, and most influential scientific body in existence, they held a special meeting in London that was devoted to, we've got to come up with a new theory for Darwinian evolution, because Darwinian evolution does not work. And thousands of scientists from around the world showed up there, and they all gave their, this has to occur and this has to occur. And I also have my own, this has to occur to make evolutionary theory work. And it's very simple, actually, because what they've noticed is that the difficulty is getting these big changes to come together, because there's no force operating that wants to produce, let's say, 20 healthy mutations at the same place at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so what I've done is, first of all, I point out that everything that evolves is a holon, and a holon is the term invented by Arthur Kessler, who was a genius, and it means a whole that's part of a larger whole. And all things in the universe are holons or heaps. A heap is like a garbage heap. It's just things thrown together without any designing picture or big structure or anything like that. And so holons are like all four quadrants are made of holons. The entire universe is made of holons or heaps. And so if you just look at the upper right quadrant, you have quarks or holes that are parts of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And protons and neutrons and electrons are each holes that are parts of atoms. And atoms are holes that are parts of molecules. And if you stop anywhere in that sequence, and if you look at a molecule, for example, you can actually see, literally see, all of the atoms making up that molecule. So this isn't some abstract airy fairy theory. You can see these wholes becoming parts of larger wholes. And
Absolutely.
molecules come together to form single-celled organisms, and single-celled organisms come together to form multicellular organisms. And inside a multicellular organism, these molecules come together to form systems. So in a human being, the nervous system, the digestive system, the muscular system, and so on. And all of those are forces that are still in existence. But the one force that is not included in all of those is, if you think of a holon as having four quadrants, there are four major forces that drive each holon. There's a left and a right force, called agency, which drives an entity to form its own wholeness. And there's communion, which drives it to become part of a larger whole. And then in an upward direction, in going towards more unity, there's a force that I've added and that I call self-organization. And several really well-known biological evolutionists have also included the self-organization force. The most famous is Stuart Kaufman of the very famous Santa Fe Institute, which is an institute devoted to systems theory thinking. And he points out that the only way we get punctuated equilibrium is a leap in self-organization. So there has to be that added force introduced into the evolutionary sequence. And I agree. And so that's what I call eros. And then the force opposite eros, I call agape. Eros is small holes driving towards bigger holes, and agape is a big hole embracing a smaller hole. And we find all four of these forces, agency, communion, eros, and agape, operating in the four different directions that a holon can move. And so that's what we're going to get from future evolution. And so all of those forces are still in play, including self-organization. So we do have this drive towards increasing wholeness, and that goes all the way up, all the way down. So that's my general take on evolution and how that's working out. And I
And regarding
started tracking that from the very beginning of creating these various types of integral models.
And because of this evolution, you were saying that your integral theory, if I understood well, you mean that your integral theory has kept on evolving as evolution has.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Super.
And I have intentionally, as I saw what was happening in each evolutionary stage of growth and development, I was intentionally looking at exactly how do those transformations occur, what's actually occurring. And this is what brought me to agree with Ernst Becker that the denial of death is one of the main drivers of human beings. And because you see this on every stage of development, I would say that you have translation and you have transformation. And I would say that as translation breaks down and dies, transformation occurs. And so each stage of development is marked by a type of death. And I started looking for that, and I could find it everywhere. When I started looking for it, it's typical of multiple intelligences. If you actually start using them, you can see what they're meant to see everywhere. And I discovered this when I first discovered multiple intelligences. And most of the pioneering developmentalists didn't understand that we had multiple intelligences. So each one of the pioneers selected their favorite multiple intelligence and they studied the development of that. So Piaget focused on cognitive development, Kohlberg focused on moral development, Loevinger focused on ego development, Maslow focused on motivational or needs development, and so on. And then in the 60s and 70s, when multiple intelligences became well known, I think it was through Howard Gardner's book called Multiple Intelligences, and he was out of Harvard at the time when he did that. And I also hadn't paid much attention to multiple intelligences because no psychologist had. And that's why none of them realized.
No? Lines of development.
That's right. And so what I would do is I would pick a different day of the week and I would select one multiple intelligence out of a dozen or so that had been proposed. And I would just work with that one all day long. So the first multiple intelligence I chose was aesthetic intelligence, or the perception of beauty. So I said, okay, today I'm going to see beauty wherever I look. And I started in the morning looking for beauty and I couldn't find it anywhere. But as the day went on, by the early afternoon, I was starting to see beauty in quite a few places. Like we're right on the edge of the Rocky Mountains, and I would look at the mountains and see these snow-capped mountains, and it just was beautiful. And then maybe I'd see a person and I think, God, that person's really beautiful. And by the end of the day, I was seeing beauty everywhere. It was like, wow,
wow.
if you just look for it, it's there. And so I included
attention. Don't you think?
Sure.
Attention and focus is
Right.
precisely the real
Right.
qualities that consciousness requires to
Right.
get the full scope of reality.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that's why I added, and this was the last type of wholeness I added, I called opening up. And that was when we opened up to all of our multiple intelligences because they're really important. And if you're not looking for beauty, you're not going to see it. If you're not looking for morality, you're not going to see it. If you're not looking for ethics, you're not going to see it. If you're not looking for on and on, you're not going to see it. So you've got to open up to all of your dimensions of intelligence if you actually want to be fully intelligent. Yeah.
And fully whole.
And whole, exactly. And it was a different type of wholeness. And what I also noticed is of these 5 types of wholeness that I had recommended that people engage, they each offered a wholeness, but it was a very different type of wholeness. And that really sort of took me off guard because I wasn't expecting that at all. I mean, we hadn't studied multiple intelligences, so how was I to know? But as I looked into it and started comparing, okay, what is this wholeness? How does this wholeness compare with waking up or growing up or cleaning up or showing up? And each of those offers a real wholeness, but it's a very different type of wholeness. So waking up offers us almost all the world's mystical traditions talk about the 2 truths. We have 2 fundamental truths available to us. One is absolute truth, which is an infinite, eternal, all-present truth. And we have relative truth, which is water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms, 1 oxygen atom. And that applies to all the truth in the relative world. And absolute truth is in the whole world. So absolute truth is the union of infinite with finite. And relative truth is just the truths that finite things have among each other. So that's one type of wholeness. And then growing up, which is the major stages or levels of development that each intelligence goes through. And I often use Gene Gebser's terms just because I've become used to them. But he labeled his major stages archaic, magic, mythic, rational, pluralistic, and integral. And I agree with those. But what kind of wholeness are those? Well, each stage in the developmental sequence transcends and includes its predecessor. So what you're getting are each stage of development is a holon, but the holons are getting bigger, literally. Atoms are bigger than protons, molecules are bigger than atoms, single cell organisms are bigger than individual molecules, multicellular organisms are bigger than single cell and it just goes all the way up the tree of life. So that's a different type of wholeness, but it's a real wholeness, and it's an important type of wholeness. It's a relative wholeness, but that doesn't mean it's not important. And as a matter of fact, at about the same time that I finished my initial study of developmental psychology, I had a spontaneous satori or spiritual unity experience. I was about 13 or 14 at the time. And what I had done is when I discovered developmental psychology, it really blew me away. I had no idea that I myself had gone through archaic to magic to mythic to rational to pluralistic to integral stages of development. That just knocked me off my feet. I couldn't believe. But as I looked over it and retraced it, I said, yeah, I have. And as a matter of fact, every human being alive has gone through those stages.
Sure.
So, but when I had my mystical experience, it was such a profound sense of unity and wholeness. I was one with everything, one with the entire universe. And so I immediately started looking around for where could I study this kind of stuff. And that's when I ran into Zen Buddhism, and I was attracted to Zen initially. I eventually became more taken with Tibetan Buddhism, but there's still both forms of Mahayana Buddhism. And what really attracted me to Zen is it only had one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to get you to have a mystical experience. And that was it. Once you had your mystical experience, you could leave if you want. I mean, you've got it. I can't teach you anything else. And I thought, man, this is exactly the stuff I want. So I started looking for Zen masters, and I actually found many of them. This was in the 60s, so-called psychedelic 60s, where everybody was interested in consciousness for one reason or another. And Zen masters from Japan were pouring into America because so many kids wanted to study something that would give them this mystical consciousness, this mystical unity consciousness, this union with absolute truth. And so I found several, and I ended up studying with several, but the one that I remember was where I first found the so-called 10 Zen ox herding pictures. And what those are 10 frames, 10 drawings showing the 10 major stages of having a waking up experience. And I saw those 10 stages, and what I had myself had done when I was studying developmental psychology is I would take, I found dozens of models of developmental psychology, including over 100 that I included in integral psychology. But these what I would do is every time I would find a new developmental model, I would get, those big yellow legal pads like that,
Yeah.
and I would take one yellow sheet and I would just write down the names of the stages that this model included.
Uh-huh.
So Piaget would be sensory motor intelligence, pre-operational intelligence, concrete operational intelligence, formal operational intelligence, and systemic intelligence. And so what, and then I would set those yellow pages, I'd tear it off and lay it on the floor. And by the time I was done, because eventually, remember, I had over 100 developmental models, and these yellow pages just were all over my apartment. I mean, I couldn't walk without stepping on them. And what I do is each morning I would get up, and before I brushed my teeth or ate breakfast or got coffee or anything like that, I just walked through the house and look at all of the names that I had written down because I was certain.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Of around 8 to 10 names that almost all of the models had some version of these 8 to 10 stages of development. And so when I got into Zen and found the 10 Zen ox herding pictures, I thought, hey, they found my same 10 stages. I'm going to be really famous for this discovery. And that's how I thought for a while. But then the more I looked at it, the more I realized they were really quite different. That these stages of waking up had to do with first person states of consciousness. And these different perspectives of consciousness are so common, we actually give them names. We call them first, second, third person pronouns, for example. First person pronoun represents the perspective of the person who's speaking. So it's an I, me, mine pronoun. Second person is the perspective of the person being spoken to. So that's you, thy, thine. Third person is the person or thing being spoken about. And those can, so what's fourth person? Because there are some scales of these pronouns that go up to 7 or 8 person perspective. Jane Lovinger, for example, has studied stages of ego development, and she has 7 or 8 major stages that everybody goes through in a full realm of ego development. And she found that each one of her stages added a broader perspective. So when you're her first stage, which is a